Welcome to Home Built Workshop, and welcome to part 1 of my cigar box guitar build. Originally, I wasn't planning on doing 2 parts to this video, but by the time I got everything edited for the entire build, it was almost 30 minutes long. So I decided to cut that into 2, and this is part 1. So let's get started with the build. If you've been following my channel for any length of time, you'll know that I play guitar, and I've been doing quite a few guitar projects. One of the things that I aim to do this year, one of my goals, is to be able to build a neck. So far I've built a few bodies completely by myself, but I've not yet built a neck. I've always purchased them or reused something that I've had. There's a lot of things that go into the neck. You've got to be able to do your fret work and a lot of measurements. Everything has to fit together really good, and to me that takes a lot of practice. Well, one way for me to get the practice is to jump right in and start doing it. I chose to start out with a cigar box guitar because a cigar box guitar neck does not have a truss rod. So in my mind, that's a little bit less work that I need to try to concentrate on all at once. I can start out a little bit small and work my way up. You still have to do the fret work and all that, but I don't have to worry about that truss rod just yet. So while this project is a fun project and I'm looking forward to it, one little piece of this project is the part of the learning process for me as I work on my skills in building guitars. I'll start off this build using my edge jointing jig on my table saw to square up one edge of this board. Now I'll readjust the fence to 1.5 inches, and I can run the nicely jointed edge along the fence and get a nice clean cut. Now I'm going to take a couple of scrap pieces of the same wood, and I'm going to glue on a couple of wings at the end of the headstock. Now I'll just lightly sand the headstock. This is just to even up the glue joints. Using my calipers, I'll measure and mark out some center points on the neck. Then I'll connect the dots using a straight edge. For the box, I'm going to measure the overall width. About 7 5/16. So I'm going to set half of that on my calipers. And then before I actually mark it, I'm going to put some tape where I'm going to be making my marks. Now I'll just scribe a line onto that tape. I'll transfer those marks onto a piece of tape on top of the box as well. Now with my center lines established, I'll use some spray glue and attach my cutting template to the headstock, paying careful attention to line up the center lines that I drew on the neck with the center lines that I put on the cutting template. And now I'll just cut out that profile on the bandsaw. I'll clean up those edges using a sanding spindle in my drill press. Before I remove the cutting template, I'll center punch for the holes for the tuners. Now I need to notch the box so that the neck fits down in a little pocket. I need to cut a U-shaped channel in both the front and the back. The neck is going to pass all the way through the box and stick out the back about 1.5 inches or so. I'm going to do that by measuring the neck. I'm going to divide that measurement into half, and then I'm going to scribe a line on either side of my center line. I've gone a couple thousandths of an inch short to make sure that the pocket fits nice and tight. I'll set the depth doing the same thing. And there's the material that I need to cut out. There's a bunch of different ways you could do this. You could do it with a table saw and nibble away at it. You could do it with a router table or some kind of a router jig. I'm going to try to do it with a coping saw. And my time behind a coping saw is very limited. I really haven't used one in years, but I feel pretty confident that this will work. I'll clean up the edges with a file. I left a little bit of the line while cutting, just to make sure if I got a little off, it wouldn't be disastrous. One thing I forgot to do when I still had the cutting template on there was to mark where the nut goes. I have the nut laid out on the template and I forgot to mark it. So I had to go print out another template. Now I'm trying to really carefully line it back up, secure it with a little bit of tape. Once I have my template lined back up, I'll make those marks. So now I've got a nice mark where the nut's going to be. So I need to measure from that mark to where the bridge is going to be. The scale length on this is going to be 25.5 inches. I know on the body I want the bridge somewhere in here. That's about 2¼ inches in from the back of the box. I know I can measure in 2¼ inches, and that's going to transfer the marks from the top to the neck. Now I can measure from the line I made for the nut 25.5 inches back. Make a mark with my square, so now I know that if I put that mark 2¼ inches in from the end of the box, I'm going to be right on. So right there is exactly where the neck needs to sit when this thing's all done. Now I'll close the lid. I'll make a couple of marks where I need to notch the neck so the lid can close. I'm going to use my router planer sled to make that notch. Again, there's several different ways you can do it. You can do it with a table saw, you can do it with a hand chisel, a plane of some sort. Lots of different ways. I'm choosing to use my router sled. I think it's going to be the quickest setup for me. I'll just use my router and a straight cutting bit to remove exactly the thickness of the lid, which in this case is 1/4 inch. Now I'm left with a nice notch that I can easily clean up with a file to get a good fit on the cigar box. As soon as I have everything filed down, should be able to put the neck in, close the lid. Nice. Now I'm going to resaw a piece of walnut to use as the fretboard. I'll first cut it down on the table saw, then I'll pass it through my thickness planer to get it down to 1/4 inch thickness. Now I'll trim it down to just oversized from its final width. This is so I can sand it flush later on. Now I'll cut the fretboard down to its final length. Now I'm going to rip down some strips of oak to glue inside the box. This will help reinforce the edges of the box and also give me a good place to secure the neck. While the glue's drying on those blocks in the body, I'm going to go back to the fretboard. I've applied some green tape to the top of the fretboard. This will help protect it as I'm working, and also I'll be able to draw some lines on here so that I can see what's going on. First I'm going to scribe a center line on this green tape. This will help me in lining it up when I finally glue this onto the neck. Now it's time to mark out for the fret slots. I grabbed the Barncaster guitar because it has the same scale length as I'm going to use for this Cigar Box guitar. I've used a little bit of tape to tape this fretboard that I'm making to the fretboard of the guitar. And now I'll just use a machinist square and mark out every fret location. Marking out your fret slots this way does leave some room for error. If there's any movement as you're marking it out, your frets are going to be a little bit off. I'm trying to be really careful as I'm marking this out, making sure that everything stays in place and nothing shifts as I'm going along. There's a fair amount of commercial jigs and fixtures and rulers and things available that'll help in this process, but for this project I decided that I wanted to just try to use an existing neck that I have. Down the road I may purchase a jig or a fret scale ruler that may help make this a little easier. Now I'm going to transfer those marks to the top of the fretboard. To cut the slots, I'm going to use my scroll saw. I've installed the blade backwards and also made up a quick guide to help me hold the fretboard at 90 degrees to the blade. Again, taking my time, lining up the cut with my pencil line. The depth of the cut is about as deep as the saw blade. I've clamped another block into place to prevent me from going too far. And now I'll drill the holes for the side dot markers. Now using a Forstner bit, I'm going to drill a shallow hole on the top of the fretboard. This will be for some maple fretboard markers. Now I'll apply a little bit of wood glue to some homemade maple dowels, and I'll tap them into place. Then I'll cut them off with a flush trim saw. And I'll set that aside and let this glue dry. Now I'm going to drill a couple of holes through the back of the box and into the support strips that I glued in earlier. This is going to create a countersink for the bolts that hold the neck on. Instead of a neck plate that you'd find on a traditional guitar that has a bolt-on neck, I'm going to use these little grommets. They're made to fit the neck bolts and they go on in place of the neck plate. So drilling the hole for these little dudes ended up being a little bit more of a challenge than I thought. They're not 1/2 inch, they're bigger than 1/2 inch, but they're smaller than 5/8. I don't have a Forstner bit in between those sizes, so I had to get a little bit creative. First I took my regular 1/2 inch Forstner bit and drilled the hole to the depth that I needed. So after doing a lot of test pieces and trying different methods to enlarge the hole to fit this little grommet, I found that if I took this little rasp for a die grinder, it's basically a round rasp so it spins around really fast. It was exactly the right diameter to enlarge the hole if I stuck it in my drill press and used it as a reamer. So what's the lesson here? Don't give up. Look around your shop, look at what you have available. What can you use a little bit differently to get the job done that you're trying to accomplish? Maybe you don't have the right size drill bit like me. Maybe you don't have the right saw. Maybe you don't have the right whatever kind of tool. Can you make it? Can you make something else that you have work for what you need? Try it out next time. Now I've got the neck slipped back in place, lined up where it needs to go, and now I'll use the divot created by the Forstner bit to finish drilling the holes to mount the neck. While I'm at it, I'm trying to get all the drill press work done. Now I'm going to drill the string through holes at the back end of the neck. Now I think the moment I've been waiting for, I'm going to glue this fretboard on. I'm going to use quite a lot of glue because I want to make sure I have good coverage. I'm going to clean up all the squeeze out and everything later. I'm going to line up my center lines when I'm dropping the fretboard into place. Now I'll set this aside to dry and I'll head back to the body and do just a little bit more work to that. And I don't know about you guys, when I'm building something I try to make the most of my time. You'll notice that I kind of go back and forth on what piece I'm working on, and a lot of that has to do with if I'm waiting for glue to dry on another piece, well, I want to keep working, so I'm going to try to work on another piece that I don't have to wait for at the moment. And then, like this fretboard, I gotta wait for that to dry, so now I'm gonna jump back over to the body. That way I can kind of keep the process going and try to make the most of my time. Now I'm gonna drill a hole in the side of the box to accept the output jack. And another hole in the top for the volume control. And finally I'll attach a drilling template so that I can mark out the holes for the sound hole. And I'll drill those out on the drill press. And that takes care of everything that I need to do with the body. I've got all the holes drilled, I've got all the cutting, all the pieces made. I believe this part is done. Now I'm going to get back to the neck. So I think we'll wrap up part 1 right here. Please make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel so that you don't miss it when part 2 comes out. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a big old thumbs up. I really appreciate your support. Also, don't forget you can follow me over on social media. I'll put all the links down below in the description. Also, when part 2 is out and available, I'll put a link to that down below as well. But really, in order not to miss it, make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel. I appreciate every single one of you. And until next time, thanks a lot for watching.